So it's a great pleasure to welcome. Starting next to André is Fiona van Echelpoel. Yeah. She is Deputy Director General in the Directorate of General Market Infrastructure and Payments of the ECB. She has worked in a number of functions in the market infrastructure and market operations areas of the ECB, and prior to that, she worked at the Central Bank of Ireland. And she has kindly replaced Mark Bale, who was to be with us but was not able to join us at short notice. So really great that you could jump in, Fiona. Thank you so much for being with us. Next to her is seated Nathalie Berger. She works with the EU Commission's Directorate General Financial Stability, Financial Services and Capital Markets Union as head of unit for insurance and pensions. She's responsible for the Solvency II review, for consumer insurance law, occupational pension funds, and international relations. And she kindly jumped in for John Berrigan, who also had to cancel at short notice. So again, many, many thanks for your flexibility for being here. Next to Nathalie is Fabrice Brossard. He's Chief Risk Officer for AIG Europe, and he oversees AIG's risk function in entities outside the US and Japan. He also oversees AIG's internal model approval process, and this year he was voted CRO of the Year by Insurance ERM. So great that you can be with us. Next to him is Anna Maria Dulster. She's Secretary General of the Geneva Association, mentioned earlier today, a leading international insurance economics think tank. She has held a number of senior executive roles in the industry, including at the Swiss Quant Group, a technology group specializing in the development and implementations of algorithms for risk management. So wonderful to have you with us. And finally, representing EIOPA on the panel is Ana Teresa Mourinho. She's head of EIOPA's Supervisory Processes Department. She's responsible for data and business intelligence tools and the operational methodology and monthly production of the Solvency II technical information. So great to have everybody with us. And let me just ask Andre, first of all, one backup question, and it would be this, quite simply, in your viewpoint as a hacker, is cybersecurity really even possible, or is a hack like the one that you have just shown us essentially an accident waiting to happen to any or all of us?
Yes, it is possible to implement proper countermeasures. But yeah, organizations should follow the standards and protect their physical security, information security, and prevent insider attacks. And also social engineering, for example, if someone calls you from an IT department asking for your password, just don't do that, please. It's the easiest way to get in sometimes. Even kids can do this sorts of stuff. And also, the companies and organizations can implement the bug bounty model and pay hackers to hack them, because the more vulnerabilities that they find, the more secure you will be. But it's not impossible to be 100% secure, but prevention is always better than a cure.
One other question. You see, if you do the research, an enormous rise in cybercrime in just the last couple of years, almost exponential according to some of the websites I've seen. Would you say, as we see this area develop and expand, that we're looking at more an increase in minor attacks or a higher likelihood of some kind of major systemic catastrophic attack?
Both, because we are in cyber war. We have state-sponsored hackers working every day to access information from other nations. We have the example of the US elections. It's one example of the impact of this cyber risk that we are all exposed. But I mean, research in this area is contributing to solve these problems. But we assisted a major attack on 2017, the WannaCry ransomware. That was a major attack, and there will be major attacks in the future. And even organizations that use the bug bounty model and hire hackers, they are also vulnerable. They are not 100% safe. For instance, Facebook implements this model, and there was a breach on Facebook. But if they didn't do this, there will be not one breach, but like 20 breaches. That's the thing.
Thank you very much. Fiona van EIOPA, what does that mean for supervisors? What are central banks and supervisors doing to get out in front, if that's even possible?
Okay, thank you very much for the question, and I think Andre really set the scene very nicely, because the level of threat and the sophistication of those perpetrators that we face every day, it's increasing, and central banks, both as supervisors and in my particular area as overseers of market infrastructures, have been quite active in this area in the last year. Over the previous years, there was a lot done in the area of vulnerability scanning, different forms of tests, but the threat landscape has really evolved, so we have to increase also our sophistication as overseers, as supervisors, when it comes to this type of threat. We need to go beyond operational risk management as we traditionally know it, or knew it. Let's say we need to look at governance, we need to look at the culture in the companies and different business processes. And we really have to bring this to the highest levels in the organization. It really needs board level attention. We also need to look beyond individual entities. Supervisors and overseers traditionally tend to concentrate on a particular entity. But when we are talking about cyber risk, this is just not enough. We have to look beyond. If I take, for example, my area, we are overseers of financial market infrastructure. So let's say a payment system. It's not just enough to protect the payment system itself. We need to look at the participants of the payment system. We need to look at the critical service providers, vendors, and vendor products. So we really have to expand our thinking and really adopt our approach in this area. And this is exactly what we are doing. And maybe later on we can discuss some concrete examples that we have in this field.
Thank you very much. Let me go to Nathalie Berger and ask you, we saw that audience poll with most people, the majority, 52%, falling into that medium level category. How would you say that companies see it? Would they also tend to discount their risk, or would you say more companies are now sort of conscientiously implementing protective measures?
Well, thank you for this question. It made me think of that kind of square that you can divide in four, you know, about the what you know, what you don't know, right. And the most interesting being the what you don't know, So this is maybe the mysterious question here. What we know is that there is, or there seems to be, a bigger awareness of companies about the cyber risk, but that does not mean that this awareness is really there up to where Andrea would tell them that they should know about it. So I understand that the cyber risk is now, or has been in the 5 last years, in the top priorities of companies in Europe. What does it mean concretely? What I can say is that we are aware of the importance of the cyber risk, of course, for ourselves, for our companies, for our insurers, and the situation of insurers is particularly important as insurers can be the victims of attacks, and so they have to protect themselves against the attacks, and they can play a fundamental role in helping other companies to get more secure against these attacks by maybe taking some of Andrea's services and then also building up the right policies. Another point which I think will be important is to get undertakings to be able to share information about the threat. So it's the knowing about the threat, and it's the sharing information about the threat, having the right infrastructure. So in Europe, we have adopted a directive on network information society, and we do cooperation, and we have more and more cooperation. We have a security agency, we have the ENISA. So there is, if I may say, a patchwork of measures which are being put in place. The question is, are these sufficient?
And is there a will to engage in real intergovernmental cooperation on this area? And can the Commission what levers does it have to make that happen, if in fact that would be effective? I mean, Andre told us we're fighting a cyber war, so I wonder what the Commission's role can be in.
Yes, we are, of course, cooperating with other jurisdictions. I mean, first of all, I would like to mention the tremendous work that has already been done by EIOPA. And there is a very interesting report by EIOPA on understanding the cyber risk. They have conducted a survey with undertakings, and there we already get to know a lot about what is known and what is unknown. And we cooperate within the G20, we can cooperate within the G7. And in the context of the Basel, we also have a committee on an operational risk working group. And of course, as far as insurance is concerned, a lot of work can also be done in the context of the International Association of Insurance Supervisors. And if I may add another layer of complexity in this, it is extremely important, of course, to cooperate internationally on this. But I think that this is an area where Europe as such needs to build up their fortress, if I may say so, their defense, and we need, and this would be a call on the European players, we also need to develop an independent market. Because if we look into the cyber insurance market, 90% of the cyber insurance market happens not to be in Europe.
Oh, okay.
So that's maybe something to discuss with the insurers.
And that's exactly what I want to discuss. We didn't plan this, but that is exactly what I want to discuss with those representing the industry here today. But before I do that, I'd like to just see what expectations the audience has of the industry. So let's do one other audience question now. And the question is this: is the European insurance sector ready to cope with the challenges of providing cybersecurity to society? And the answer options are yes, partially, or no. And please vote now. Andre, I'm thinking you could hack this right now and bring, have a totally different result come up. So 6% say ready to cope, 44% say partially, and 50%, so almost the majority, say no. Fabrice Brossard, there is a lot of hype around cyber risk insurance these days. It was quite interesting to me when I was doing the research for the panel to see how much, you'll find it all over the web. Just put in cyber risk insurance, lots of offers come up. Obviously big field. How clearly defined and measurable is the exposure here? And is this really an opportunity, or is cyber risk in a way a business risk for the industry itself?
Yeah, when I look at the poll, I think I'm going to have to use a lot of humility to answer the question here, because clearly we're far from having all the answers. I mean, as AIG, we've been selling cyber insurance in one form and another for nearly 30 years, so we're one of the longest players in the sector. But certainly the product and the threat, are evolving day by day. So I wouldn't compare what we did for the Millennium Bug sort of cover to what we need to do today. But we do have that experience, particularly US experience. I mean, you referenced 90% of the market being in the US, but we do see a huge increase in the demand in Europe. I saw a study from, I think it was from the London Market Group, that said that by 2020 it will be about 7 billion of premiums. So that's also whetting a lot of appetite, I guess, from undertakings or insurers, as I would say. And there's something I wanted to share with you, which is a survey I saw from Marsh, which shows a little bit sort of echoes of the first poll that we had just when we reconvened, which is that when they asked boards, what are your top risks, the vast majority listed cyber. But then when they asked boards, are you going to be buying cyber insurance, or have you considered it? 20%, 1 in 5, said no, and more confusingly, nearly a quarter said that they didn't know whether they were covered or not. So I think we have, as an industry, to dispel that fear and work with the customers on the clarity of the product. One of the things that we've heard a lot about over the last few years, and certainly in dialogue with supervisors and the EIOPA, is about silent cover. As a leader within the industry, we want to take quite a strong stance on silent cover. So we are making all our coverage explicit from the 1st of January, so that we're very clear. And that's for physical and that's for non-physical, so that our customers know whether they're covered or not covered. And as an insurer, that we know what our aggregation is. We also believe that because there's a value to the cover, we need to be clear about the price of that cover. So we think that the era of free add-ons effectively is confusing because it introduces either cross-subsidies or, I guess, questions from what is really the value of the product that people are buying. So this is a market change that we see. We'll see what happens with other insurers. Obviously, we distribute through brokers. So it's an whole ecosystem that needs to change, but I think it's moving quite fast. On the number of claims, if we look at our own experience within Europe, you talked about an exponential rise. Last year, 2017, we had as many claims reported to us as we had in the 4 previous years. So that's definitely, I'm not sure if that's exponential, but certainly a big increase. And what we see also is that in parallel, the number of notifications has really increased. And I think it's on the back of GDPR that people are reporting to insurers claims that, well, potential claims, and in actuality, many of them turn out not to be claims. And again, this is something that we share, and you can find it on the EIG website, sort of the trends that we see. And the nature of the threat is also changing. So at the moment, the top claims that we see are to do with ransomware on the back of Petya, WannaCry, so big events that were in the news, but we also see the number of data breaches by hackers. These curious guys, is definitely on the rise.
Creative guys, I think.
Exactly, overcoming issues like we're all trying to do. Yeah.
So you mentioned types of claims. Would you say that there is a good match between client needs and the products that are out there? And would you say that coverage is being sold prudently and accurately to users?
I think on the prudence part, that's why we want to move to affirmative, because we really want, as a carrier, to know what we are covering. And I think definitely there's the tools are there already in terms of risk management, in terms of making sure that we understand the risk that we're putting onto the balance sheet. I think also it's a question of fairness to the client. That ambiguity, I don't think, is really helping anyone when they come to claim. What we see is that the product is evolving because the clients are asking us for something different. So more and more, the clients used to focus on the source of the incident, and is this going to happen to me? Now customers believe at some stage there will be someone that will breach their defenses, and therefore how are they going to cope with it? So we're moving much more to operational risk. We're talking much more about business interruptions. So how am I going to deal with understanding really, for example, the hack that I've been a victim of? How am I going to have a PR agency that is going to help me? And what we cover is a lot to do with losses of profit, reputation, additional costs that the business is going to incur. So that cover is moving all the time, and what we're trying to do too is that we've got some products which I would say are fairly simple, that are more designed for SMEs, but for the largest clients, it's a bit of we're trying to be in a win-win situation whereby we ask much more probing questions. So we have a questionnaire, altogether it's nearly 200 questions that we want people to answer, to do with how frequently do you patch your systems, the type of suppliers that you have, concentration in your supply chain, and that allows people also to understand their vulnerability, red teams, exercises, bounty hunters, and so on. These are all good practices that we want to encourage, obviously because we prefer for the claim not to happen in the first place, and we think we've got a good alignment there with our customers.
Thank you very much. And let me go straight away to Anna Maria Dulstar and ask you, from your perspective, from an industry association perspective, essentially, how you see the business evolving in future.
Well, first of all, I would like to say a couple of things about cyber risk, because for us as an industry, it's a new type of risk compared to the other ones we have had. It has specific characteristics. It is a global risk. One cyber attack can have impacts all over the world. It is an evolving risk. The type of attacks that we see evolve very fast. Also interesting is that we have other players coming in. As it was said before, we have governments that, for some risk like natural catastrophes, are backstop providers, but at the same time, these potential backstop providers are actors. So it's also very difficult how to assess that. So it is, for us, a market where we are working on. It is an evolving market. And we have done a report recently on risk management, accumulation risk management in cyber insurance. And we've asked ourselves, what are the conditions now to ensure that this new market, relatively new market, can grow very well? And we've identified three very important conditions that need to be satisfied. The first one is the traditional one, is protect yourself. Or better said, increase resilience, make sure that you have resilience at source, i.e., as Fabrice explained, that your systems are patched, that you know what to do in order to make sure that you reduce the potential losses that you get out of attacks. Secondly, for the insurers, price as adequate as you can. Our skill is to do adequate pricing of a risk. This is not easy for the moment with insurer, for the cyber risk, but do it as good as you can. And thirdly, for the industry and also for regulators, I think, is ensure that the companies and the industry as a whole is able to withstand major shocks. So these are the three prerequisites we find. We also looked at the major risks to take care of, because we want this new market to evolve steadily and sustainably. And there are a couple of risks that could interrupt that path. The first one is the risk of a major event, kind of big tail event, like a major blackout in many parts of the world. How do you recover from that as an industry? That's one. The second one is non-affirmative cyber. Non-affirmative cyber is cyber that is in an insurance policy, like for instance in a business interruption policy, but in that policy, cyber was not mentioned, explicitly mentioned, considered as a risk, and is not priced for. So we have priced as an industry for business interruption because of a flood or because of a malfunctioning, but not because of a cyber attack. And there are such non-affirmative cyber risks in probably many policies in our books. So it's something to be aware of as well. That can be a major risk. Another one is that we must manage as an industry in a relatively short term, relatively fast, to get a better data, get better data on cyber incidents, on the types of incidents, and especially on the losses that they have caused. If we have better data, we can model better, and we will be able to price better. We've gone that path for natural catastrophe risk, and we need to go that path for cyber risk as well. But this one, we think, is more challenging, where we are now.
Could you just say a word about your view on what you see as the supervisory and regulatory challenges that would be associated with achieving a sustainable cyber risk insurance market?
I think, first of all, it would be good if regulators would be positive towards data sharing. They are positive towards data sharing in the natural catastrophe field, and to support that and do what they can to achieve that is something that we would welcome very much. Secondly, the key to success in this market is disciplined underwriting. And for that, it is first of all, define the risk appetite. Make sure that everybody in the organization is well aware of the risk appetite for cyber risk. Ensure that qualified people do the underwriting. There's a regular review of underwriting that has been done in the past and of the policies. And then good management information systems and an awareness, as I said before through the organization up to the board. I think these are some major things that regulators can do to support market development.
Okay, and we'll take that and go straight on to Ana-Teresa Moutinho.
Yes.
And on the basis of all that you've heard, Ana-Teresa, what can we expect from supervisors, and what are you already doing in this area? How would you say things stand in the supervisory dimension in view of what we've been hearing?
Yeah, first of all, thank you. I would like to say that, in fact, awareness is rising from all perspectives, from the ones that need protections, and we can see that in the growth of the market. From the undertakings, we can see that they have identified it as a top 5 emergent risk, and also for us as supervisors and regulators. I mean, I think Natalie referred to our report on cyber underwriting. We also have identified it as an emergent risk in our supervisory convergence plan. I think Gabriel referred to it in the morning. We had some quantitative and qualitative questions on the 2018 stress test as well. And lastly, we have referred to the US and the experience of the US market. It's also an area identified in the EU-US project dialogue that we have. Having said that, as supervisors at EIOPA, we see it really as an holistic perspective. We need to take care of the cyber resilience, I mean, it was referred in here before, and as a cyber underwriting. And it's 2 different perspectives that we are addressing from a regulatory perspective. If I may start by the cyber resilience, I mean, I think it's clear, Andreas said, countermeasures are possible. So we need to take that into account. We need to be positive about it. So we need to let the industry know what are the supervisory expectations, what we expect from them in relation to their IT and communication security, what is the governance that we need around it, and what are our expectations. So on that area, we are working on an answer to the Commission FinTech Action Plan, where actually our job is to assess if we need a specific regulatory answer in this case. And we started by mapping supervisory practices, because we have members that are more involved in this area, and cooperation is also about learning from the ones that are already applying it. So this is one perspective. The other perspective is we are also assessing, together with EBA and ESMA, if it's adequate to have a cross-sectoral European cyber attack framework. Something very similar, I mean, Andrea referred to, it was new for me, the bug bounty programs. Basically, you need to test your systems, and you can buy hackers for that. Of course, I think it's important. We need commitment from the high level of the company, because you need investments. I mean, we saw it's possible, it exists, it costs. So it really needs investment and commitment from the undertakings. If I can move to the cyber underwriting, in here I think it's crucial to say it's a matter of risk management and risk management system, and undertakings know that for a long time. Again, they run through the same process with cat risk and other risks. Of course, cyber has different challenges. We know already, lack of experience, lack of data. Even when you have data, data might not be relevant anymore due to this dynamic nature of the cyber world. So this is really where we need to concentrate. But first, apply the fundamentals of good risk management. Undertaking needs to have a strategy, need to define their risk appetite, and then they need to ensure that they are able to identify, assess, mitigate, report all risks, even if they are in non-affirmative covers. And that's, of course, where the challenge lies in this case. One of the tools that we see as best practice is really to start reflecting in their own stress test framework, a cyber attack scenario, for example. And this is the way forward. I would say these are the 2 main areas from a supervisory perspective.
Thanks very much. Fiona, Ana-Teresa just talked about the resilience of the system. How can we best increase the resilience of the financial system as a whole, and what is the ECB doing in that area?
Yeah. We actually have quite a few different work streams in this area. And let's say one of them is, one of the first ones I would mention is what we are doing in the area of penetration testing. And we have developed what we call TBER EU. It's a threat intelligence-based ethical red teaming. So ethical hackers like my colleague on the right, we would engage their services and invite them to penetrate our payment systems that we are overseeing and that we are operating ourselves. And maybe one aspect we haven't touched on so far is, of course, it comes with a cost for the operators of the payment system, for the participants in the market. And we are very conscious of this in my own department because I work a bit more on the policy side, developing the standards, but on the other side of the department, there are also the operators of the payment system, Target 2, who have to comply with the standards that we are coming up with. And if we think of Europe as a whole, penetration testing, if every authority would come with their own unique penetration test, this would be a huge burden on entities that are participating in different systems, in different countries, with different authorities. So we are really trying to have this as a harmonized EU approach. We developed it on a framework that the Bank of England originally did, that some are familiar with, CBEST, and we have expanded this also with the help of Bank of England and the other central banks of the Euro area and the EU to have this TIBER EU framework. So we are going to slowly start rolling this out. Another area are what we call the cyber resilience oversight expectations. You may be aware that the standard setting bodies CPMI and IOSCO released guidance back in 2016. And now we are in the process of operationalizing this guidance. So we need to have this for the overseers on the one hand, that they have a guide that they can use as a basis for assessing the systems. The operators need to have a more granular details, or we call them expectations, of what we expect them to do to operationalize the guidance. And then we use this in the third leg as a means of a dialogue. So we will invite the entities that we are overseeing to engage in discussion. Now, we have drafted these for payment systems, but they can be adapted by other entities, other infrastructures, and maybe other sectors. So we are trying to go ahead in that direction. And maybe one final thing to mention is we have set up what we call the Euro Cyber Resilience Board for financial market infrastructures, because we really believe that industry and authorities have to work together in this area. And we hear the call of the Commission. The Commission, we do have represented on that. We have ESMA, we have the EBA. But I realize sitting here today and shifting uncomfortably in my seat is we don't have EIOPA in the room, but maybe after today that will change. But we work with chief risk officers of major market infrastructures, and we also have ENISA there as well. So we're really trying to identify what are the areas that we need to work on and how we can do this together to make the system more safe.
Thank you very much. Andre, when you hear all of that, would you say that this battle, this war, or at least this battle in this war, can be won with regulatory weapons?
Yes, I think those are excellent measures, and I'm happy that you use penetration testing. But the difference between penetration testing and the bug bounty model is that you pay for a penetration test like in advance. If they find like 1 or 2 or 3 vulnerabilities, you pay the same, like 50K for a pen test. With the bug bounties, you get more impactful vulnerabilities, but you need to open your systems to the public to be tested. That's the trade-off. But yeah, supervisors should help the organizations to implement proper countermeasures and mitigations. And also, they should be able to do some incident response. I mean, like preventing breaches, learning from each attack, recovering, and obviously sharing this information is really important to prevent these cyber risks.
Thank you very much. Nathalie Berger, everything we've heard is telling us we're dealing with a multi-headed monster here when we talk about cyber risks. So what is the current focus for regulators, but also what is the most crucial dimension that they're going to, or dimensions that they're going to need to address in future?
Well, as you said very rightly, so it's a multifaceted challenge, and I think that the only possibly efficient measure should be multifaceted as well, and maybe a strategy devised at different levels. So we have the issue of the a regulatory cooperation, and we participate in some technical working groups from the G20 to the G7 to the more specialized fora like within the associations of supervisors. We need to build on everything that will allow the market participants to share information amongst themselves. It's very, very important about the risks. Then we need to dig further, and so to look at how could the undertakings better defend themselves against the cyber risk. So we need to look into the cyber risk management procedures, including, of course, ICT security and governance requirements. And so in that regard, in application of our action plan on cyber security, we will assess if some further action is needed to ensure that market participants have in place equivalent requirements to ensure that the financial system is more resilient. And of course, we will need to facilitate, or we will need to assess the possibility to facilitate supervisory convergence and enforcement of ICT risk management and mitigation requirements in the EU financial sector. And if we dig again, if we dig more, and if we look into the framework, the regulatory framework surrounding the activity of insurers, I think at some stage we'll have to look into the operational risk and look at the way that the cyber risk is taken into consideration there. I'm not saying that we should necessarily take some compulsory measures, but at some stage we should do some review to check if everything that is in place is appropriate. So there is not one response or one magical response. And there should be certainly a number of streams of actions which should be well orchestrated and well coordinated to be complementary and to provide more efficiency. But the question will be, will we not be always running after the risk? And will there be a time where we would together have managed to take that risk close to zero? Because then by that time we would have a good system for allowing companies to share information about the risk. We would have fantastic cooperation in between regulators and possibly governments on, exchange of information on the risk and on action. And we would have insurers which would have really caught up the market, so would be in a position to provide appropriate insurance. But then the question is, and the question to the sector is, how is it and how will it be possible for insurers to develop cyber insurance policies that will be able to have a kind of a dynamic effect? So we'll be able to catch up and cover not only the risk of today, but the risk of tomorrow and the day after tomorrow.
Let me jump briefly to Anna Maria to ask you, when you look at the industry as a whole across Europe, do you see significant disparities between the degree to which the insurance industry itself is well aware and well protected in the area of cyber risk?
Do I see differences? Yes, of course, I see differences between companies. Do you mean from a security? Yeah. How far the companies themselves are well prepared against an attack? Well, I don't have an insight in how different companies are structured, but certainly there's a difference in awareness of the risk and how they deal with the risk. They have different systems, they have different infrastructures. I am in contact with some companies on this, and it is a matter of, okay, first what infrastructure you have, but still continue to create awareness with your staff, continue to create awareness with everybody involved, and continue to train people and to upgrade your systems. And as with many other activities, there are certainly differences between the companies, yes.
So that said, Fabrice Brossard, certainly AIG with a lot of experience in this area, what can insurers do to protect themselves? What would you say would be the clear measures that an insurer needs to be taking if it wants to be well protected itself?
I think it's probably quite a long list because, I mean, in the case of my company, we both see that as an operational risk, but also we offer the cyber coverage, and we're trying to make sure that one informs the other. So one of the questions I ask myself first is, would I insure AIG? So when I talk about this 200 question that we ask our customers, we need to be in a position to answer them ourselves. We do quite a lot of partnering, obviously, with both the public sector, but also with other companies, and we learn quite a lot from this. I think there's more that we can do. With this initiative through the GA, there's with other companies through the CRO Forum, for example, we developed a taxonomy for operational risk. I think there will be more, and I think that's very positive for the industry. But also that dialogue between the underwriting, informing what we do from our cyber defenses, I think is important. And as a company, I mean, we do have several hundred colleagues, in the cyber defense center and so on. Looking at this, we're probably less advanced than the banks, and I think there's a whole continuum of awareness within insurers. What insurers can do from the risk management point of view, I would say that there's no revolutionary tool. We sort of back to basic in terms of stress testing, management of limits. So we're very clear, for example, our standard limit is $75 million. We look at what is the sort of a cyber 9/11. What would that cost? As much as we can quantify it, and is that in line with the appetite of the board? And that's X billion. Is that within what the main board is comfortable with? And that question of the appetite is both qualitative and quantitative, and again, that's why we wanted to move to this affirmative cover, because we want to be very clear about what is our appetite around cyber risk, and I think that's still something that is a little bit maybe grey in the market, and I'm sure will become clearer as the market develops. So.
Speaking of the cyber 9/11, how would you say cyber risk compares to other risks that reinsurers are facing?
I think I'm not sure it's as existential as for the sector as some of the other topics you mentioned, that usually there's a panel talking about insurtech and the whole disruption to the sector. I wouldn't necessarily put it at same level, or even the sort of disappearance of guarantee and low interest rate in the life sector. But what concerns me a little bit is I think that there can be naive capacity in the market. Clearly, this is one area of the market that is growing. There's not that many, so it can become quite a crowded space. Obviously, we're talking cat-exposed line, so you can make money for a period of time, or you believe you're making money until the cat hits you. So I think the more I see an elongated value chain, more actors in that chain, even the sort of the return of bordereau. You were talking about monsters and challenges. For me, when I think about certain MGA behavior, certain bordereau, that concerns me. So I wouldn't again put it as necessarily as high as some of the other threats, but clearly that's one that is growing for the industry.
Thank you very much. Another question to Anna Maria would be this: what your industry association can do, or your think tank, in order to support the industry, given the fact that we're really looking at a moving target. There's a lot of room for, as a number of people have pointed out, for a great deal more data and so on. So what are the steps for you in future?
So we are a think tank, and our main activity is research. We're global, we're insurance specific, and cyber is one of our work streams. Currently, as I said, we have done a report on the accumulation risk. Our next one will be on resilience, and thereafter we plan to do one on how to further develop the cyber market. To develop this research and to work on this research, we interact with working groups, with representatives of the industry. So there is a good exchange on what's going on, where the main challenges are. And the outcome of our research we use to go into debate with stakeholders, and different stakeholders, especially also regulatory stakeholders, FSB, EIOPA, NAIC, IAS, with the purpose of supporting these stakeholders in development of regulation and of legislation to reflect to them what's going on in the industry, what the view of the industry is, what the drivers behind the industry are, and where we see a need for regulation and legislation. And so that's what we do. More recently, for instance, the IAS has just released a consultation on systemic risk, and it's the first time that I see it there on paper that cyber risk is considered by the IAS, so the global standard setting of the insurance industry, as a potential systemic risk. So this is a case where we want to go into discussion with them to see how what we can do and how we can find responses to that threat. So our role is mainly research and debates on that research with regulators and policy setters.
Anna-Teresa, what can and will EIOPA be doing to increase the resilience of the system in this area?
Yeah, I believe that we need to increase the resilience, and for that I think we need to work on two areas, and at the same time. I think it's obvious we need to deepen our understanding of the cyber world. There are areas that were referred that we don't have the full information on aggregation of risks, on non-affirmative risks, on the reinsurance cover of risks. So there is a number of areas that we need to deepen our knowledge. That's why we have had this questionnaire on the 2018 stress test. We will analyze the answers during 2019, and that will provide us a further insight of potential vulnerabilities in relation to the resilience of the market. And of course, we'll take that into consideration in our future stress test, potentially having a cyber attack scenario, who knows. But we need also to act already. I mean, there are areas that we can work on that will increase resilience. I think three are the most important areas, which is robust governance, increase of data availability, and cooperation. We need robust governance from the undertakings. The systems need to be in place not only to prevent and to protect, as we have seen, but also to be answered to respond and recover from a cyber event. And for that, you need testing, you need to share experiences, and you need a continuous learning. Because even if you have your system in place, you test it, everything went well, you ask for hackers to hack it, it went well, it doesn't stop there. You need a continuous learning because also the technology is continuously evolving. And that's where we need to work. And then improve data availability. I mean, for insurance, of course, you need to have better data models, to do better pricing. Sharing of data cyber events, I mean, NIS directive exactly refers to it, and not only of events, but near events as well, so prevent events that were prevented by the systems, and it's really important that everyone shares that information between them. And for that, of course, I will finalize with the need for data for supervision. We as supervisors need data to be able to monitor the market. We need fundamental data on premiums, on claims pattern, results of any ORSA that has included the cyber attacks on the stress tests, for example. So on that area, EIOPA is considering enhancing the reporting framework that we have to have more data on cyber risk. On that, of course, we are as well, and again, using the experience from our US colleagues that have in place already a system to collect data on cyber risk, which gives me to the third area that we can work already, which is cooperation. A cyber event and cyber risk has no borders. We need to cooperate between entities, between jurisdictions, and across sectors, and that's clear. And we need to cooperate not only at the pre-event, but also post-event. Pre-event, again, because to test and to improve and continuous learning, we need to cooperate between all of us, but also a post-event collaboration. We need to be ready and to test if in a post-event situation we have our platform for cooperation and communication ready to minimize the losses of such an attack.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to open to audience questions. If you have a question for the panel, please raise your hand now, and we'll bring a microphone to you. Okay, I have one back here. Yeah.
In this context of cybersecurity, I ask myself, how can we attract people that are experts in their field to, to protect ourselves, to work with clients? In Munich, we try to do some hackathons to get in touch with these people, but it is a challenge to really retain them long-term, etc. So I would be interested in your view.
That sounds like a question for you, Andre.
Oh,
yeah. Can you please repeat the final part?
She works for Munich Re, for the reinsurer.
Okay. Yeah.
And they are trying to attract good talent, and she's asking what is the best way to do that.
Okay, so yeah, I think that I heard that you're organizing hackathons, right? That's a very nice idea, but also there are those CTFs, the capture the flag competitions, that are competitions for people that are interested on this field. And some companies, even in Portugal, in my country, are building CTFs and launching CTFs to attract people to the field. And I think that's one of the best strategies that you can follow, is that building challenges to get some new people to work with you.
Anybody else on the panel have an idea? Possibly you, Fabrice?
I think certainly, we have a lot of initiative also to identify new talent, and I would say that the knowledge also is quite transient, so you need to make sure that you stay relevant. We have a science team where we do have, I would say, non-traditional profile for insurance, but I would say, like is reflected by the question, that that dialogue between people that are very technical and the insurance world is quite difficult. So I do recognize the challenge of keeping people interested. I would say also, in a way, that there's a movement in between companies, in between regulators, insurers, and so on. So I think we're talking a lot on this panel in terms of sharing that information. In a way, it's a closed system. So it's how do you tap into it?
If I may add to that, we've also seen this as a challenge ourselves, not just to hire new talent, but how to bring the talent that we have up to speed in this area. So we had to organize dedicated trainings for the central bank overseers, not just at the ECB, but collectively across the ECB, and we found this really very useful. It takes time, but I think you have to work also with the talent you have in-house and see how you can upskill in this area too.
Thank you very much. Who else has a question for the panel? Okay.
Thank you. First of all, I have a question for Fabrice. First of all, congratulations for being CRO of the Year from my publication, Insurance ERM. Oh. I'd just like to ask you, you mentioned in terms of silent cyber risk, you said next year everything, all the cover will be explicit, just so customers will know what's covered, what's not covered. Could you tell me what steps, what sort of procedure did you go through in order to tackle silent cyber risk? Because obviously, all the panelists mentioned it's already hard enough to find data to model affirmative cyber risk, let alone silent cyber risk. So I just wonder, apart from stress test scenario or managing the limit, what else did you do? If you could just give me more detail, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to expand a little bit. Well, I would say it's been a long journey, partly because it involved data, and the data is always a challenge. So it took us about 3 years, really, to make sure that we had coded the silent cover, all the areas where within products we could have some exposure to cyber. And we got there in the middle of this year. The other thing is we had a training program of all the underwriters, so a little bit what we're saying about education, making sure that our own staff understand cyber risk better, and indeed we're in a position to explain to brokers and to the end customer why it's a positive move, because there's some parts of the industry that do believe that the ambiguity was going to play in favor of the client, and we take a fundamental difference, a different point of view. We will say, I mean, it's for us, you know, it's we try to be a first mover in that space because we are a large player. We hope that the rest of the industry will follow us, and but we believe it's the right thing to do. But it's not something we decided, you know, last month to be ready for the 1st of January. Companies that want to do this need to invest quite a lot of time in it. The other thing is in terms of modeling scenarios, I mentioned, the fairly traditional techniques. That said, it's about 10 years ago that we tried. We put all our data for the long tail lines of business, so financial lines, casualty, for most of our countries in a database so that we were able to model scenarios. And scenarios which have a component of cyber, so when we think about cyber accumulation, it's not only about cyber scenarios, it's other scenarios which have a cyber component that we look at. And we're constantly testing ourselves. We're trying to find new scenarios that we hadn't thought about before that can be even more destructive. So again, you need to have a flow of new people that have got new ideas, partnership. We partner with people like Predicat, for example, in the US, so that we can imagine new scenarios. We still look at what EIOPA, national regulators, have in terms of stress tests. Lawyers have done a lot of really good work in that space too. But we try to come up with our new scenarios and to push ourselves more in terms of can we create something that is in a way more destructive, so that we're really clear about the exposures that we have.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for one more question. Who in the audience? Yes, please. Could we get a microphone right there?
Yeah, sorry. Tim Jones, I work for the British Embassy in Berlin. And I have a question. It's partly for the hacker, I suppose, but partly for everybody. But for the hacker, I think particularly, I think it might be actually useful. How much do you assess the risks in systems are to do with inherent problems of a large technical system always having problems, and how much it's just basically people not obeying quite simple rules of, sort of hygiene, changing their password and that kind of thing? I mean, I mention it because I think there is an impression that if you spend enough money on your cybersecurity, you will have a secure system. But if you spend a load of money on cybersecurity and someone's still writing their password on a post-it note, you've thrown your money away. So, I mean, how much do you think it is a really big technical problem, and how much is it a kind of inherent human failing?
Yes, obviously, you should. It's a really tough problem to solve because, I mean, we can make it harder for an attacker to penetrate our organization, but we cannot make it impossible. And obviously, using weak passwords or people or employees on an organization not being conscious for these problems can be a serious risk, like victims of social engineering and account takeovers via exposed credentials on the internet, on the deep web. There are dumps of passwords. And you really should, inside your company, implement all these measures, but also make people conscious and like give small trainings regarding online behaviors that people should follow, in my opinion.
I see Fabrice nodding vigorously. Do you want to say something to that as well?
I mean, all the testing we do show that people tend to be the weak link, so I completely agree with that. We're constantly looking, for example, at people that have got admin rights. Do they really need to know admin rights? Because we find that the population that's got administrative rights, so more rights, should be more educated, and when we test it, that's not necessarily the case. And I think social engineering also is on the rise. So I think we train people to look at a spoof email from an African country, for example, but then we realized that, in fact, with so much information out there on Facebook, LinkedIn, and so on, people know quite a lot about you and can seem very, very genuine. So it's a race, effectively, and that education of all the staff members, too, because it can be the point of entry in the company can be anywhere. So that education campaign is an ongoing battle for us.
Anyone else? Yes, please.
If I may, I would agree. So, most of the times people are the weak link, but also because of the sophistication and increased sophistication of the attacks. And that's where the continuous learning or continuous training, it's important, I mean, from all aspects and to all stakeholders.
And people are sharing a lot of information online these days, and that's a serious risk as well, because digital profiles are an extension of our identities, and we should care about them.
Actually, in that respect, Nathalie Berger, because this is certainly work that the Commission has also been doing in terms of digital identity and digital citizenship. Is there a link here, digital awareness also? And what in the future can the EU do in that area, perhaps the broader area?
A very interesting question, and I was immediately thinking about what would be the appropriate balance to reach, because there's certainly a lot we can do. There's certainly a lot the regulator can do, or the regulator can propose to the co-legislators, but there we are constantly at the border in between preserving essential freedom, preserving privacy, and allowing the exchange of data. So, of course, I mean, we're working on, we have a number of work streams which are going on, and we have our digital agenda, and we have everything relating to cooperation on cybersecurity. We have the powers of our agency, ENISA. We have, so everything there is coordinated to get to a higher security. But if we take these challenges from a societal point of view, we have to look at where we should start and where we should stop. We are going for more digital. We're going for more, for example, digital payments, cross-border digital payments. If everything becomes digital, this certainly brings a lot of progress and technological progress and makes everything easier. But at the same time, let's be careful not to go to an Orwell type of society.
Thank you. I have a question in the second row here. Do we have a mic? Yeah.
Catherine Plessis from EIB. This is not a question, more a comment about the fact that we as citizens should take care of not sending too many data to we don't know where, and maybe use the Quant search tool instead of Google. Quant is a French-German tool. It's financed partly by EIB, and it preserves privacy. And everybody receives exactly the same information. They do not track your center of interest. So everybody searching for the same word will receive exactly the same information. They don't select things for you. Thank you.
Anybody want to say anything to that point? Certainly that gets into the whole question of the tech titans and the degree to which it's possible to regulate companies with this kind of market power at all. Nathalie, possibly?
Well, the question is, what do we want to achieve? Here we were talking about consumers' choice. And the question is how to get to consumers having effectively the choice, which gets you to a competition issue, which gets you to the general question of knowing whether there is a situation of a dominant position on the market, which takes you to the next question, which is, if there is dominant position, is there an abuse of dominant position?
Right.
But I guess this is not the topic of today's exchange.
And I guess you're not with the cartel authorities, so we won't put you on the hot seat here. We do have, yeah, please, back here.
Thank you. Oh, can you hear me?
No? Go on. It should be on.
Hello.
Yep, it's on.
I work on the cyber insurance side in the UK Treasury. And one of the things we've talked about quite a lot is kind of not having data and a lack of data, making it really hard. And part of the reason the US is kind of miles ahead is because all of their kind of data laws and data breach kind of regulations. With GDPR coming in, the idea is that we'll know a lot more about these data breaches, and we've already had kind of insurance industries kind of coming to us and asking us to share this data. But I was surprised. I was surprised when AIG was saying that the kind of one of their biggest claims actually come, like their cyber claims, come from ransomware as opposed to data breaches. So what's the kind of barrier with those kind of attacks, right? Because we just think data breach, GDPR, privacy, etc. But on the kind of the bigger side that you kind of see, what is the barrier there to getting that information?
I'm not sure I understood the question, as in what I was giving is the typology of the most common claims that we have, and ransomware was first followed by hackers, but I'm not sure I understood your question, sorry.
Do you have the microphone still?
I do now. Sorry, I just meant that maybe this is just me being technically illiterate, but if there is a difference between a kind of data, so in terms of GDPR, for example, would data breaches caused by ransomware also need to be reported?
Are you asking about the damages?
Yeah, just in terms of the data that's right. Presumably industry want more data in order to understand what kind of attacks are happening, and that will help them underwrite the risk more clearly.
Yes, I mean, you can have a ransomware attack without it being, I guess, technically a GDPR incident, because it just locks the data on your systems and you cannot access it yourself. It doesn't mean necessarily that it's accessible by someone else. You know, I think of it like a clamp on your car, basically. It doesn't mean that your car can be driven away.
I would like to add the data that, from an insurance point of view, the data that we would like to collect is the data that has caused a damage or a loss to the person who has suffered from that attack, be it a ransomware or be it a breach. And in order to collect the data, GDPR is one legislation in Europe that will lead to more reporting of more incidents of different types, eventually not or yes or no ransomware. But if you compare to the United States, in the United States, the market for cyber risk has developed very well, because there is an obligation to report all losses that that insurers have paid for because of cyber risk to the NAIC. So there's a better transparency on what's going on. Another point in creating that transparency, apart from, okay, you want it to be reported in order to be able to collect it, is that it is a challenge to collect it as well. I mean, in order to collect data, you first of all need a taxonomy, as Fabrice mentioned, and then you need them the data in a certain way, structured and organized, in order to be able to collect it and to analyze it. But that is the next step, I think, that is needed in order to develop that market, because without data you cannot assess your risk.
Yeah. And I'll say it's an area definitely where we need to think what could be the regulators and the supervisor role. I mean, as you said, GDPR will promote the collection of the data, the NIS directive as well. We have initiatives from the market that we know that develop taxonomies and are doing trials on data sharing. We just really need to think, and that's what we are actually also doing at the moment, what could be the regulatory, the role of the regulators and the supervisors in this data collection.
Thank you. We can keep going for a little while. We're waiting for our final keynote speaker, who does not appear to be here yet. So who else? I think, but on his way, I know, but not quite here. So yes, please. Oh, he is here. Okay, wonderful. Then we can say a very warm thanks to all of our panel.